Before I begin, I would like to take a moment to offer gratitude for the space we're gathered in, and for all those who have worked to make this evening possible and actually are continuing to work to make this evening possible. Many hands work very hard so we can be here together. I also offer gratitude to the teachers who've shared their wisdom over time to support us here and now. And I wish to acknowledge the land on which we meet and the generations of people who have lived here. So as I mentioned earlier tonight, I'm speaking about mindfulness and the Eightfold Path. And over the last few months, we've heard teachings on the wisdom factors of wise speech, wisdom factors of wise view and wise intention, and the ethics factors of wise speech, wise action, and wise livelihood. Mindfulness is one of the three concentration factors on the Eightfold Path. The other two concentration factors are wise effort and wise concentration. The word mindfulness is used more commonly today than in previous decades, but not necessarily in an informed way. It's used throughout the self-help world and in advertising. And the meaning of the word can become diffuse and vague. This is true not just because it is overused in some ways, but because it is also difficult to define. I've taught a mindful self-compassion course for several years now, and I still find it challenging to explain what mindfulness is when asked about what I teach. So I'm actually going to ask if anyone here in the room has a definition they'd like to offer for mindfulness. Does anyone have something that they explain if somebody asks you what is mindfulness? And if anyone on Zoom, if you want to just put it in chat, what is mindfulness? What is it? Anyone? Yeah. Being able to step away and look at somebody or something. Your own mind, thank you. I appreciate it. And I tell my students, by the way, in my classes, talk to me like you're talking to a deaf person through your mind. Just yell, it's okay. So yeah, stepping away, thank you. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Darby. So actually, thanks, Darby. Darby says she uses the definition for herself of Kabat-Zinn. And you've given me an intro because that's what I actually use as well. Thank you. But you can see it's hard to, if somebody asks you, it's hard to explain it in just a quick, sure, I can tell you what mindfulness is. It's being present, it's being now, it's knowing what's going on and stepping back, right? So trying to define mindfulness is like trying to define love. It's not something, but an active process that impacts how we interact with the world. Gregory Kramer, in A Whole Life Path, describes two kinds of mindfulness. The first he calls regular mindfulness. This, he says, is what is offered in secular programs and teachings. The second is mindfulness as part of the Eightfold Path, which is a specific kind of mindfulness. Gregory says this type, quote, enables ethical life, guides the path as a whole, and is a key mental quality for the arising of liberating insight. I find this perspective to be interesting and helpful. Likely, mindfulness is something most of you are quite familiar with. I find it helpful from time to time to revisit my understanding of what it is, as my thinking, I already know, can create a habituated perception. I came to mindfulness practice from a secular background, and so my understanding is informed from that origination. As such, the definition I work with is from Jon Kabat-Zinn. And this is his definition, as Darby already alluded to. Mindfulness is awareness that arises when we pay attention on purpose to the present moment, non-judgmentally. There's quite a lot in that definition, so I'd like to go through its parts. Let's begin with awareness. Here's the definition of awareness from Merriam-Webster. Knowledge and understanding that something is happening or exists. So reflecting on John's definition then, mindfulness brings about knowledge and understanding that something is happening or exists. And how does mindfulness bring about this awareness? First, we must pay attention. Here's the definition of attention from Merriam-Webster. The act or state of applying the mind to something. At one point, I heard a description that I really love that helps me to understand the intention behind the idea of bringing attention in mindfulness, because it's not something that you have to be very rigid about and tight and controlled. And the description was, imagine a field full of kindergartners, all roaming around, looking at all kinds of things, having a wonderful time. And the teacher says, everyone, come here. I have found this beautiful butterfly. And with open arms, invites them all to come. Come. And let's look. Let's all bring our attention to this butterfly. That's like our mind and our thoughts. So instead of being very tight and I will focus, I will pay attention, you can think of it more of a gathering of your attention. So in what context are we bringing attention? On purpose, with intention. We know we are bringing our attention to something. And when are we bringing this purposeful attention? The present moment. And how does one define the present moment? It's now. And now. And now. Or as my father was fond of saying when things would get muddled, life is what happens when you're busy making plans. I guess it's the life part of that quote. We are aware that we are bringing our attention to this now, whatever that may be, instead of being off somewhere else in our minds. And with what attitude do we mindfully bring our attention to the present moment? Non-judgmentally. Non-judgmentally. What does that mean? I think this can be misunderstood in some ways. Non-judgmentally does not mean non-critically or without care. It means, as best we can, noticing the labels we apply to the experience, good, bad, or neutral, and then knowing how those labels impact our perception. Acceptance of the way things are is part of this step. This does not mean we like the way things are. It just means we let go of fighting with reality. As Bhante Gunaratana says in Mindfulness in Plain English, you can't understand something fully if you're busy rejecting its existence. So, for example, I may not like that it's cold outside, but this will not change the temperature. Once I accept it's cold, the opportunity to choose a response becomes available. I put on a coat. So putting it all back together, mindfulness is awareness that arises when we pay attention on purpose to the present moment, non-judgmentally. This is just one way to define what is meant by mindfulness. You may have your own perfectly sound definition. The Buddha taught that the best way is to try it for ourselves. It's not something you can learn by talking about, it's something you learn by doing. Like the taste of a ripe peach, or what it feels like to dance, or to love. And the beauty of mindfulness is that it can be practiced in relation to all things. The practice of mindfulness is beneficial in everyday life. There are many research studies that tell us this. Time and time again, I've had the honor of witnessing the transformative impact learning to be more mindful has on a sense of well-being through teaching mindfulness at Mary Baldwin University. But we may ask, why? What's so great about practicing mindfulness? In the class I taught in the fall, I had a student ask this very question at the beginning of the semester. During one of the early classes, I gave a talk about mindfulness and then asked the students to try and practice what they learned as they left the class. Perhaps look at the world around them as they walked from class, or notice the people they see, or pay attention to their own bodies. The next class, I invited the students to share about this experience, what it was like and what they noticed, certain there would be bright amazement at noticing things that they had not noticed before. But this one student said, "Yeah, I did that, but I don't see why it matters. Why should I care?" At one point, my response likely would have been to try and convince the student of how great it is to be present, to not miss your life and all the many ways mindfulness is good for your well-being. and I probably would have judged her as difficult. But this time I said, "That's a great question. Let's see what answer you have by the end of this semester." So we ask again, what is the purpose and benefit of mindfulness? On the very first page of his book, Mindfulness in Plain English, Bhante Gunaratana gives this example of what some of our lives may feel like. There you are, and you suddenly realize that you're spending your whole life just barely getting by. You keep up a good front. You manage to make ends meet somehow and look okay from the outside, but those periods of desperation, those times when you feel everything caving in on you, you keep those to yourself. You are a mess, and you know it. But you hide it beautifully. Meanwhile, way down all of that, under all that, you just know that there has to be some other way to live, a better way to look at the world, a way to touch life more fully. You click into it by chance now and then. You get a good job. You fall in love. You win the game. And for a while, things are different. Life takes on a richness and clarity that makes all the bad times and humdrum fade away. The whole texture of our experience changes, and you say to yourself, okay, now I've made it. Now I will be happy. But then that fades too, like smoke in the wind. You are left with just a memory. That and the vague awareness that something is wrong. He goes on to say, no matter how hard you pursue pleasure and success, there are times when you fail. No matter how fast you flee, there are times when pain catches up with you. And in the meantime, those times, life is so boring, you could scream. Our minds are full of opinions and criticisms. We have built walls all around ourselves and are trapped in the prison of our own likes and dislikes. We suffer. Mindfulness is a factor on the Eightfold Path, meaning the Buddha taught the practice of mindfulness for the purpose of liberation. Liberation from suffering, or in Pali, dukkha. Bhante Gunaratana describes dukkha this way. And it does not just mean the agony of the body. It means that deep, subtle sense of dissatisfaction that is a part of every mind moment, and that results directly from the mental treadmill. The suggestion then is allowing awareness to arise in the present moment helps to reduce suffering. One way to translate the word for mindfulness, which is sati in Pali, is to remember. The invitation is to remember that now is the only time you have for anything. We practice mindfulness of, to have a clearer idea of what is true about the nature of things, and to do our best not to miss out on our lives. We practice so we can work with what is here, so we can make choices more and react less. When we bring mindful attention to our own thoughts and feelings, we can become less attached to them, maybe even take things less personally. Gregory Kramer says, if we're not aware of our thoughts and actions, they will spring only from habit. Seeing clearly the impermanent, unsatisfactory, and selfless nature of phenomena is inherently liberating. When sati is strong, reactivity naturally calms down. I have a plaque in my house that says the beginning is always today. I think it would be better if it said the beginning is always now. It's so freeing when you think of it. We always have now to begin again. In the now, we've not failed anything or left anything undone, because we have now to do it, to respond, to make another choice. The only time to do anything. Of course, this leads to an interesting realization. Not only is it true that the beginning is always now, so too the ending is always now. In the now, we have access to the end of the spirals of worry, clinging, frustrations, anger, suffering. The end of suffering only happens now. You can search for answers for meaning, but what seems meaningful to me is the question, am I experiencing this moment, this gift that is life? And the rest becomes just thinking. Freedom from suffering isn't out there somewhere or in some other time. It's in the awareness of the sensations in your feet, the beating of your heart, in your laughter and in your tears, and in the presence of the people near you. It's right here within all experiences, in the moments of wonder and when you feel things you don't want to feel. This is why we practice mindfulness, to remember to be here, to not forget we are alive. Because most likely we will forget and fall back asleep into our habituated existence. This, too, is life, is enough, just as it is, and an opportunity to wake up. Perhaps you will consider checking it out for yourself. Mindfulness as a factor on the Eightfold Path is essential to the entire path. It allows us to be aware of how we are thinking, our perspective, wise view. We bring attention to our thoughts to contemplate and understand them. Mindfulness allows us to bring awareness to our intentions, to ask ourselves why we are thinking or acting in a certain way. It allows us to be aware of how we are speaking and the impact that speech has. To be aware of our actions, livelihood, effort, and concentration. As we've said during this series, the path isn't really a one-directional process, but an interwoven, interdependent process, often leading us to where we started, back home. There's no place like home. Dorothy said that in The Wizard of Oz. There's no place like home. But like Dorothy, my dears, we must go through some things before we can gain the wisdom to discover this for ourselves. There are a lucky few who seem to have instantaneous understanding of what it means to be liberated from suffering. For the rest of us, it helps to have some tools, which is exactly what the Buddhist teachings offer. Like Dorothy, we're supported by learning wisdom, the scarecrow, compassion, the Tin Man, and courage, the lion, on our yellow brick road journey through life. A journey that leads us home. This is the journey of the Eightfold Path. Remembering to and knowing how to be mindful takes some effort, which is why we practice Vipassana or insight meditation. Here's how Bhante Gunaratana describes Vipassana and mindfulness. The meditation technique called Vipassana, insight, that was introduced by the Buddha about 25 centuries ago, is a set of mental activities specifically aimed at experiencing a state of uninterrupted mindfulness. Vipassana is a practice done with specific intentions of facing reality, to fully experience life just as it is, and to cope with exactly what you find. Vipassana is a direct and gradual cultivation of mindfulness or awareness. The object of Vipassana practice is to learn to see the truth of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and selflessness of phenomena. What we really seek is not the surface goals. Those are just the means to an end. What we really are after is the feeling of relief that comes when the drive is satisfied. Relief, relaxation, and an end to the tension. Peace, happiness, no more yearning. The Buddha gave very specific instructions to help us practice mindfulness, called the Four Foundations. They narrow the range of attention from everything at once to something more manageable. This is from the Satipatthana Sutta. Thus have I heard, at one time the Blessed One was living among the Kurus at Kamasadama, a market town of the Kuru people. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhu thus: Monks, And they replied to him, "Venerable Sir." The Blessed One spoke as follows: "This is the only way, monks, for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the destruction of suffering and grief, for reaching the right path, for the attainment of nibbana, namely the four foundations of mindfulness." What are the four? Herein a monk lives contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. He lives contemplating feelings in feeling, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. He lives contemplating consciousness and consciousness, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. He lives contemplating mental objects and mental objects, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. So the four foundations of mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings or Vedana, mindfulness of the mind or Citta, and mindfulness of Dharma. Since we now understand the best way to know about mindfulness is to practice, I invite you to drop back in and let's practice a little with these four foundations. So starting with the body, bringing your attention to the experience of body sensations. Perhaps starting with the feet and moving the attention slowly up the legs to the pelvic area. The stomach, the back, the shoulders, the arms, the hands, the neck, the face, top of the head. Now just allowing awareness of the body as a whole. Perhaps noticing areas of tension, warmth, cold, tingling, or pulsing. Remembering that mindfulness is non-judgmental, noting sensation just as it is. Now let's shift to awareness of feeling tone or Vedana. So as you continue to hold the body in awareness, adding the awareness of any labels of good, bad, or neutral that arise with sensation. There are areas of the body that feel good. Are there areas that you would label as feeling bad? Perhaps there are areas that don't feel anything one way or another. Simply bringing attention to the experience of labeling your body, your sensations. Noticing if there's any difference in the experience of a label of a good sensation or bad sensation or even a neutral one. Now shifting once again, bringing attention to the state of the heart-mind. Is there an experience of calm or agitation, happiness or dissatisfaction, present or distracted? Any emotion or just a general state of mind? And maybe noticing as you make contact with the states of the heart-mind, how these states feel in the body. And finally, looking at your experience through the lens of the Dharma. All teachings can be experienced in the here and now. In this foundation of mindfulness, one can reflect on the Four Noble Truths, watching the arising of suffering, its cause, its end, and the way to its end. Or one can contemplate an emotion or mind state as simply one of the 5 hindrances of desire, aversion, sleepiness, restless, and doubt. Or one might deconstruct an emotion into the component 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. Or you may like to simply reflect on the following. When this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. As with my student, may you too come to find what impact the practice of mindfulness can have on your life, the gift of being fully present in this moment, remembering that you are alive. And may you remember that your body is a wonder, that you are made of stardust, of atoms that have traveled through the cosmos to be that which is in you. May all beings know kindness. May all beings be happy and free from suffering. Thank you for your kind attention.